Okay, so now we will listen to Michael Clarke, who is coming from the University of Huddersfield and who is the principal investigator of the project IRIMAS, Interactive Research in Music as Sound. And I think that we will keep the questions after the two following presentations. The one of Frédéric Dufeu, who works with Michael Clarke, and his colleague Keitaro Takahashi.
I'd like to add my thanks to those of others who've said how grateful we are to Xavier, to Sonia, to Science Squared for initiating and organising this conference. It's been, I think, as almost the last speaker, I can say it has been a wonderful event, full of different interconnections between things that are going on. That's really fascinating. And when I was just starting a few months ago, my ERC project, one of the thoughts I had was to try and get in touch with various other people running projects and find what links there might be. But this has all been done for me now, and it's been great to make connections, which I'm sure many of us will continue to activate over the coming years. We were supposed to, I'd also like to thank Xavier and the others for the accommodation of moving us around, because our flight on Sunday was cancelled and we were supposed to be speaking on Monday, so we're now giving this speech, this talk at the end of the conference. And what was supposed to have been a poster session, Keitaro and Frédéric are going to give immediately after this, which is why we're merging the questions. So they're giving more a demonstration of some of the software and talking about the future. I'm going to explain some of the ideas behind it and some of the background to it. So this is the team. It's not as large as the team that's just been speaking, but it combines musicologists and people with scientific background and also people who bridge that that divide. So I come from a musical background, but I've also been involved in quite a lot of programming over the years. We've got three musicologists as senior researchers: Robert Adlington, Amanda Bailey, who I think is still just here. I know she's got to leave soon, who's been here and talking about her involvement in another project. She's also involved in ours. And Jonathan Stock, an ethnomusicologist from University of Cork. And then technical expertise from IRCAM in Paris. Axel Rerbel provides that. And then Frédéric and Keitaro, the two postdoctoral research fellows on the project, both from a musical background, but both with very strong technical understanding as well. And in October, we have 3 PhD students starting who are more from a musicological background, and each of them will be focusing on one of the 3 case studies that I will be mentioning in a few minutes. But I want to go back to some of the background to this project. And it was about 15 years ago, I think now, that I was invited to contribute a chapter to a book on the analysis of electroacoustic music, something I'd been doing for myself and something I'd been doing with my students. But when I was asked to contribute a chapter to a book, I thought, how do I do this? Because I always do it interactively with my students. I make examples to show them, I play them sounds, and we discuss it and so on. How can I just put this on the page of a book? Even diagrams and things won't really work. For the nature of the music we're talking about. Music notation doesn't really fit this repertoire. And so there were some particular challenges I faced here. And just to explain this a bit more for those who are not familiar with this context, I'd like to just play a couple of musical examples of electroacoustic pieces. This is one from a piece called Wind Chimes by the composer Dennis Smalley. Just a very short extract, but I think you can hear already that the musical structure there is to a large extent defined in terms of evolving spectral morphology of the sounds. It's not so much about rhythm and pitch in the more traditional sense. It's how these sounds change internally within the sounds in terms of their spectra. The sounds themselves are not the sounds of traditional musical instruments, traditional musical sounds perhaps. And so existing language and existing Western music notation don't really fit with this. So how are we going to start describing it, to start analysing it and studying it? A different approach is perhaps needed. Let me just give one more quick example from a piece called Mortios Plango Vivus Voco by the composer Jonathan Harvey. So similar things apply there, but to go a bit further, in that piece, it's based on the recordings of a voice, his son's voice, in fact, as a choir boy, and the sound of a cathedral bell. And what happens is that the partials that make up those sounds actually merge from one timbre into another. So what has been a component part of one sound breaks off, and you could hear it there glissandoing until it becomes the partial of another sound. So even the basic building blocks of timbres, of notes, of instruments disappear. They're all malleable, they're all transforming. And there were many other examples I could play of different ways in which electroacoustic music often goes beyond what we'd normally expect in music. Again, this whole challenge of how do we analyse electroacoustic music. So where do you begin in such a situation? Well, given that we're in the 21st century, why stick to words and diagrams printed on a page? This was my challenge of contributing to a book. So I asked, can I add some software to this contribution of a chapter? Unfortunately, I was given the answer yes. So that's when I started inventing software that would help me to work directly with the music as sound. Not rejecting words, not rejecting diagrams, but often the diagrams become interactive diagrams on the screen where if you click on them, something happens, you hear something. Also creating models of how the sounds were produced so people can learn, rather like you might learn about modulation or harmonic sequences, you can learn about the processes by which this sound was created by recreating it and manipulating it and transforming it. Now, in a few minutes, Frédéric is going to give some demonstrations of some of the earlier software we've developed, so I'm not going to launch the software, and I'm not going to give a big example, but I think it's just useful at this moment before I go on to give a brief example. And this is a video recording of a demo of an earlier version of some software that we're working on, which I think Frédéric is going to demonstrate a bit further later, and it just summarises some of these things that can be done. And Frédéric is narrating this demonstration.
With advice from the composer and the help of his archives, been able to trace the chronological stages of the evolution of the work. Our software enables us to show this evolution graphically.
Sorry, we're not showing the other screen for some reason now.
Each node in the graph is a sound that can be played. On another map, one can see for the sections with...
Sorry. So I think that the best is to mirror displays. Oops, just need to... Sorry, gather windows. Yeah, thanks.
Otherwise we can just quit the...
I just bring this back. Yep. Arrangement.
Yeah, thanks. Good, so hopefully now we'll be able to see as well as hear Frédéric, so just check whether...
With advice from the composer and the help of his archives, been able to trace the chronological stages of the evolution of the work. Our software enables us to show this evolution graphically. Each node in the graph is a sound that can be played. On another map, one can see for the sections we have been focusing on, the evolution of the initial sound through its different processes up to the final mix. Processes leading to one particular node can then be further explored.
Okay, so Frédéric will perhaps show a bit more of that later. But this software, especially in its latest version, provides an access to a vast resource of materials from the composer's archive for researchers to explore further. And it's an example of our aim of our analyses, not just to provide finished analyses, but to present a means for which people can develop further and develop their investigation at greater length. Another precedent to the work that we're going to be doing in the IRIMAS project is some work I did with Amanda, and she's now at Bath Spa University, as you may have heard earlier, despite what it says on this video of her in a minute, before she moved. And it's called Evolution and Collaboration. I have a couple of copies here if anybody wants a copy at the end, for free. It uses software to structure a very large and rich body of ethnographical and analytical materials which relate to the composition, rehearsal and first performance of Michael Finnis's second string quartet. So this isn't electroacoustic music now, but it's still contemporary music. The software facilitates flexible and varied navigation through this extensive library. And Amanda is, as we said, part of the team of IRIMAS, and we're hoping to continue some of these sorts of things in different context. So I'll just go now. And again, it's not going back to the other program for some reason. Do we need to? It's doing it on my screen, but not on the.
And it is because PowerPoint messes up the display.
Yes.
So there's no way around it, in fact. So
PowerPoint tends to take over the computer, I think, and not allow you to go off and do other things. Thank you. So this is a demonstration video that Amanda made of our software, which I think gives quite a good insight into what we were doing in that project.
My name's Amanda Bailey and I am Reader in Performing Arts at the University of Wolverhampton. Information resulting from composer-performer interactions, or even just performer interactions, typically remains undocumented. This research aims to develop a better understanding of musicians working together as a way of addressing the dichotomy between performance and musicology. The DVD is an outcome of my research with the Kreutzer Quartet and Michael Clarke, who is Professor of Music at the University of Huddersfield. It aims to identify new procedures and methodologies for research into string quartet performance practice, to find original ways of presenting the findings to performers, composers and musicologists, and to explore new approaches to performance and analysis in ensemble playing.
So that's another example of the things that went before IRIMAS. So IRIMAS is an ERC advanced grant, started in October last year and is for 5 years. And it intends to apply those interactive aural analysis principles to other musics, particularly musics where there are oral traditions or aural traditions, such as folk song and other folk music, to improvisation, to contemporary instrumental music, such as spectral music, and also to classical Western music as it's performed, which, as I'm sure everybody is aware of, is something that's been developing more and more in terms of an interest. And what I'd like to do now is just to give something of the musicological context, having given some of the software context, perhaps some of the musicological context to what we're doing. So attempts to integrate aural experience into musicological publications have been few and far between in the past. In part, this is because until recently, the technology available to facilitate this has been limited. And a notable early example is the work of Hans Keller, who lived from 1919 to 1985. So this is a posthumous publication you can see there. His functional analyses, in fact, abandoned words altogether and were presented exclusively as musical performances. More recently, Caroline Abate, in 2004, drawing on the ideas of Vladimir Yankelevich, has highlighted the ineffable in music, promoting the drastic as opposed to the gnostic. The drastic involving a category of knowledge that flows from drastic actions or experiences and not from verbally mediated reasoning. Kofi Agawu has argued that in a music analysis, the truth content is not necessarily a literal empirical truth, but rather a dynamic motivating truth, and that analysis is most productively understood and practiced as a mode of performance and as a mode of composition. He discusses the importance of the aural in analysis. The aural or aural home of music analysis has an effect on the kind of knowledge produced. Another development in musicology has been the move towards a significant broadening of the repertoire studied, going beyond the traditional boundaries of the Western classical repertoire, enlarging what Georgina Bourne describes as what counts as music to be studied. And doing this often means embracing works that do not conform to the conventions of Western musical notation. With these musics, as with electroacoustic music, a fundamental question is where to begin research if no score exists. Transcription is one solution, but this involves reductive interpretation in itself and is anyway something that may not accurately reflect the complexity or the temporality of the music. A further major movement in recent years has been towards research into music as performance. Nicholas Cook's groundbreaking monograph, Beyond the Score, Music as Performance, claims that it supplants the traditional musicological knowledge of music as writing and reconceives music as an activity through which meaning is produced in real time. Cook argues that scores represent pieces of music as spatial configurations, and music theory mainly consists of the elaboration of non-temporal models, whereas performance is an intrinsically temporal, real-time activity through which meanings emerge. All this seems to me to imply that a major new breakthrough is urgently required, one that is the key focus of the IRIMAS project, researching the integration of musicological meaning with temporal and aural experience. As the anthropologist Tim Ingold has expressed it in a different context, the need for knowing to be reconnected with being, epistemology with ontology, thought with life. And this is about more than simply changing the means of presentations of research. Working in this way leads to a different approach to the research and to different research questions being posed and answered. On another level, such an approach also facilitates a change towards a more interactive, participatory model of research. Textual research outputs tend to imply a model of direct transfer from a pre-packaged knowledge, a book or a paper, to a recipient, whereas the creation of interactive software resources for a work or repertoire implies a distributed model, one where the recipient researchers participate in and in turn extend the knowledge of the music. Although working at the level of research rather than of school education, this is an approach somewhat akin perhaps to the ideas of constructionism developed by Seymour Papert at MIT. So, Next, I'd like to just move on to an overview of the contents of this project. IRIMAS will investigate all these issues in the context of a wide range of music, so no longer really just looking at electroacoustic music, in fact largely not looking at that, but looking at other musics. And focusing primarily on areas where notation and transcription are especially problematic, through case studies in ethnomusicology, contemporary art music and improvised music. And a PhD student will work on each of these 3 case studies. The project combines musical expertise with technical expertise, as I've already explained. So the case studies, oh sorry, I forgot to move the page forward for the quotes, but you heard me read them, I hope, there. So the first case study is to do with ethnomusicology. And here we're going to focus particularly on folk songs in performance. And in the current state of the art, such repertoire, often an oral tradition, is usually transcribed into Western notation. But in performance, such music contains subtleties and timbral variation, microtonal pitch fluctuation, accent, flexibility of rhythm, tempo and dynamics, all of which can elude transcriptions. Furthermore, different performers sing or play in different ways, and yet they may not be creating expressive departures from a fixed model, so much as flexibly realizing the possibilities of both the song and of the act of singing in particular social contexts. In using software to work directly with sound, it will enable researchers to engage directly with the nuances of such music making and to compare it with the singing of others or with the same singer in subsequent renditions. I don't know if you noticed, but in the work I did with Amanda Bailey, we had comparisons of the first 4 performances of that piece that you could move between and compare those performances. Perhaps a similar idea is here. And again, it's without reducing the song to a notated transcription, which may not capture its emphases in any case. And as I've mentioned, Professor Jonathan Stock from University of Cork is this specialist working on the project in that area. Our second case study is on the area of contemporary art music, in particular spectralism. This is music in which timbral aspects play a significant role in the conception, shaping and structuring of the works. It is to be found in the music of composers such as Chelsea, Radulescu, Dufeu, Grisey, Murail, Haas, Harvey and Sariaho. Extended playing techniques often feature in this repertoire, further widening the sonic range. The internal structure of timbres, the ways in which they are combined and transformations between timbres are central to how such works are formed. We'll be looking primarily at acoustic music in this repertoire, but it has much in common with the computer music we were discussing earlier. Although the music is usually notated, crucially, notation does not fully represent the aural outcome of such works. Analysis of this music requires investigation at a level below that of notated pitch and rhythm to consider spectral components and their transformation. And my colleague at Huddersfield, Professor Robert Adlington, is the specialist involved in that particular case study. And finally, of the case studies, improvisation, in particular tracking the creative process in free improvisation. And the final case study centres around improvisation then, and by its very nature, this repertoire is not usually notated in full by the artists. It is flexible and fluid, and performances evolve over time and through the interactions of players. Notation and fixed graphics are too rigid and too static to provide a full account of the subtleties and complex transformations over time. But software can link audio to dynamic interactive graphics and can transform sound to focus on particular aspects and relationships. And this case study will work with musicians to track the creative process as it develops. It will record rehearsals and performances and use software to analyze audio and video to study the development of ideas across time and between ensemble members. And Professor Amanda Bailey of Bath Spa University now is the specialist in that case study. We also hope to investigate the classical Western repertoire as it's performed and ask how our software might be used to further help develop and elucidate those crucial aspects of music that, as Nick Cook has identified, lie beyond the score, the written score. For example, we believe our interactive approach can add significantly to the study of the role of rubato, portamento, amplitude and articulation in the performance of such classical repertoire. So, in summary, IRIMAS seeks to radically transform analytical approaches to music, extending the interactive aural approach to all musics, using the latest digital technology to enhance the existing text-based and visual-based approaches, not rejecting them, but enhancing it by incorporating the aural as a central element. Developing generic tools for use by musicologists, including those who are not technical experts, will also be a key feature. We don't want this just to be end with our analyses that we create. We want to create tools that will encourage others to use them so that this approach continues after we've finished. Interactive play is central to our approach in a number of ways, in terms of imaginative interaction with sound through software, through analysis seen as creative engagement with the music, in emphasizing that the recipient of the analysis is not to be regarded simply as a passive reader, but as someone enabled to interact with the analytical materials presented and extend and develop the analysis in future. The analytical output, therefore, not as a finished end product, but as an invitation to continuing imaginative exploration. Is music analysis about determining some universal truth about a work? Does that even exist? Or more likely, is it about people, humans, listening and interacting playfully, thoughtfully with music as sound, and with the processes used to create it? And so I've got on screen there now some links that you can find. Those links are also on. We've had a poster session which we were supposed to deliver on Monday and we didn't. So that's going to be replaced by the demo that Keitaro and Frédéric are about to give. But we've got some copies of our poster down here. If anybody would like to take one and 2 copies of the video, you're welcome to pick those up at the end. And they also contain those URLs. But I'm now going to hand over to Frédéric next, who's going to talk about some of the software. I didn't name the previous project. The most immediate precedent of IRIMAS is a project called TACM, Technology and Creativity in Electroacoustic Music, which involved the 2 of us, plus Professor Peter Manning from the University of Durham. And Frédéric, I think, is going to show now some of the software that arose from that project. Thank you.
All right, good afternoon. So, yeah, very briefly, I will just continue with this piece by Trevor Wishart. So those who may not know him will just need to know that he's a key figure of the electroacoustic music scene in the UK. So he was born roughly in 1946 in Yorkshire, where we come from. So Imago was composed in 2002, and it's a particularly interesting piece for us to study because it's essentially been created on the basis of one single source sound borrowed from another composer, Johnny T. Harrison, that you can hear here. Okay, and from that, that's just 2 whiskey glasses clinking. From that, he built a whole 22-minute-ish piece. So, obviously, one obvious research question for us is how did he just develop a whole piece with this very fragment? And on the other hand, it's quite nice because it's providing us with a sort of good didactic case for showing genealogies of processes. So I'll be very short on that, but you saw the idea in the previous video. Basically, you take that sound. Wishart develops his... Is it too loud? Okay. Thanks. This small sound is processed in a variety of ways that spread out as a sort of initial tree, and that then makes a global graph altogether. So if I follow that way, probably you can see my cursor here showing this kind of relationship. You can click pretty much any sound we've got on that map and see here that that sound has been frozen spectrally in order to have this sustained sound that in turn has been sort of edited with just a basic amplitude envelope and so on and so on. Here, this has been transposed further, and then, sorry, it's a bit small, but arranged as sequences and so on, and you can go all the way up towards the final piece. At the top of the presentation here, you can see 8 final premixes that in turn make up the final 22-minute work. So that's one way of representing the sounds that have been very kindly given to us by Trevor, but in the light of what Michael just said, it's also nice to make sure that we don't just show us our vision of things, but that you can maybe yourself play with the archive that we've been given. So another of the available presentations of this software is essentially a chronological representation of the sounds that Trevor meticulously archived. So all of these sound files are time-stamped, so it was easy to create a calendar representation of this so that we can listen to his bank of sounds from day one of creation, on April the 17th, 2002, to the final day. So that you can yourself use this software and explore the sounds and try to investigate some possible connections between them that we may not have found or that we may not have presented in our book chapter or software. So for instance, day one, obviously, we've got this sound, then just a stereo to mono conversion, not too difficult so far. And then on 6 days later, basically, a bunch of experimentation from that very poor, apparently poor and uninteresting sound, such as this. So just loop it in a very simple way, but that starts giving you a sense of harmonic content. Some other stuff like, that's kind of the same, but iterations with modification in pitch, and so on and so on. So I'll just play you my favorite one. Okay. And so on. So I can swear you that I've had the pleasure of spending more than hours on this, and that's really a super nice thing for you to do in turn, to just explore which sound may have led to which. There are some little options I won't detail now, but that enable you to navigate between categories, folders, and things like that. So that's really about this idea of you listening to sound, but also playing around, as Michael just mentioned, and exploring further than what we may already have done. So just to show you very briefly that this is just one case study, but we had 9 in the TACEM project. So each case study comes with its own application. So I'll just briefly mention a radically different example, but still from the electroacoustic repertoire. So John Chowning is one of the pioneers of digital synthesis. He's still alive. He's based in Stanford. So this is a piece that was played and composed for the opening of IRCAM in 1977. And if you listen to it on CD, you will hear something like that. Many of you will know it already anyway. So I always make the mistake of showing this before playing it, but the idea of this map is to break down this frequency modulation and reverb-based texture into subcomponents, which is the way it's been generated. And Chowning, just to cut it extremely short, Chowning did not generate the synthesis parameters of all of these little squares that you see manually. He wrote an algorithm in the Stanford Artificial Intelligence language, and my coloring here enables me to represent these squares grouped as algorithmic events. And since we've been lucky in that case to find, thanks also to other musicologists previously, but thanks to John, essentially, who kept a lot of documentation, we've been able to rebuild the algorithm that he wrote at the time and to make a transcription on it, so that we, as musicologists or as people who want to experiment with this algorithm, we can essentially regenerate our own events of stria. So in this case, that's what you've heard previously. 10 events generated according to the parameters that you've got here on screen, but you can say, okay, I would like maybe to have more elements, longer event, play with different timing parameters, frequency parameters, frequency modulation parameters, and so on, and see how it sounds like. So in some way, it's nice to not only be able to reconstruct what the composer has been making, but what also could have been possible given some technological conditions. So that's what we've got here, and that is what makes most of the approach fascinating, is that you can really try to explore some given tool and make your own idea of what are the actual limitations of a given situation. Okay, so that was just a very brief and hopefully not too quick introduction to TACAM, but all of this will be freely available shortly. So I'll just now hand it over to Keitaro, who will talk about the future of IRIMA's project. So obviously, this is the results of a whole AHRC project that is now over. So we don't have actual demonstration for IRIMAS, but IRIMAS, unlike TACAM, is about not delivering pre-made analysis, but delivering tools for making analysis, as Keitaro will say in a minute. So.
So good evening. I would like to talk about how we apply the concept of interactive aural analysis to our software in IRIMAS project. So in IRIMAS project, we are developing a software which provides aural experience for musicologists to assist in the development of their research strategies and the investigation of music. The keyword of aural analysis, aural experience, is an important concept of interactive aural analysis. In IRIMAS, we use this in two ways. One is to analyze music, and the other is to present outcomes of the musicological research. The interactive aural analysis targets a wide range of music or sound phenomena, which are not efficiently represented in traditional Western notation, as well as not easily described by text, graphics, or charts. So when we listen to music, we tend to pay attention to particular aspects of the sound, depending on our intention or our knowledge or our aural abilities. Therefore, we possibly miss a lot of information by listening. Especially in musicological research, we need to focus on particular musical events and their variations through time, and these are not always easily recognizable by listening. So some music theories are not always associated with how we hear the music. Therefore, our important mission is to operate a sort of auralization of diverse musical theories, as well as complex musical structures and sources mixed with other musical components. We use digital signal processing, neural network algorithms, or synthesis techniques, and the interactive graphical user interface to resolve or visualize and describe music sources in audible format. The research outcomes are also presented by IRIMAS software, so that readers can experience it interactively and even investigate as they want. We can see such an analogous activities in the term audiation proposed by Edwin Gordon in 1999. Audiation is to orally comprehend musical sounds and to give it syntactical meanings. He used this word for musical education and to describe how musicians understand music by listening. We will give access to a variety of theories, algorithms, and media in IRIMAS to engage with music analysis. These are integrated to realize interactive aural analysis. We are still developing a basic system of software, and we don't have the demo today yet. But just let me show you some possible implementations. Firstly, we aim to integrate various kinds of media, for example, synchronize, synthesize, and transform them into compatible formats. This integration is important to provide aural experience because we often present music by using various media which are currently not linked to each other. You can operate spectral analysis, but we aim to convert every single resultant component to an audible format. For example, if you select extract some peaks, the software manipulates to sound interactively. Imagine you are analyzing a folk song. You may want to investigate the relationships between format information and pitch fluctuation in vocal part. Then you can simply extract corresponding overtones from sonogram and operate pattern matching process, and you can listen to the result. Or if you want to focus on the intonations or accents, you can isolate this information from original data and resynthesize them to listen to separately. So these are just an easy examples what we can do with the software. I just want to emphasize that our aim is not only to design the software to let you use various tools without technical fluency, but more importantly, our software should also let you take initiative to discover your musicological ideas to develop your research. So we want to design something which doesn't restrict how it should be used, but something which covers all dimensions of your musicological request. Thank you very much.
So we have 5 minutes for the questions.
This feels a bit weird because I work in the next office. Is the goal of the project that these sort of diverse musical cultures that you're looking at should become co-analysable? So you've got more or less incommensurate ideas of what music might be between, say, the tonal tradition and improvisation and spectral music. Is the idea that you're going to render them comparable in some sense through the tool set?
That isn't one of the main goals of the project. Our aim is to develop diverse tools that will help in different situations. And just as when I was working with Amanda on Michael Finnis's music, live music played by string quartet, we took a different approach in some ways to what I'd done with Jonathan Harvey's more chest pango vivus voco before. Nonetheless, there are experiences that had been learnt from one that transferred from the other. And it could be an interesting thing that comes out of this if we do find commonalities, but I certainly want to try and impose a single scheme over the whole of the musical repertoire. But we would treat each of the different fields in their own right, but I think hopefully be aware and alert to possible synergies and where we might, at least technically, if not musically, learn from working and moving from one to the other. But thanks, that's a very interesting question.
On the immediate same line, do you see any prospects of extending this to non-musical creative processes like theater coming together, rehearsals after rehearsals, or even, I don't know, creative discussions in groups?
Again, not part of our immediate plans, but some of the reviewers of our proposal suggested that we might look at interdisciplinary uses of this and thought that was a strong potential. So it's not built into the time frame that we have and the funding that we have, but if we find opportunities to do it or things to do afterwards, certainly. And likewise, I mentioned about performance of Western classical music. That wasn't in the proposal because I'd previously had it rejected and criticism of that and whether it was relevant to that. Though I thought it was, I took it out to strengthen the proposal. It was accepted and the reviewers then said, why aren't you looking at Western classical music because it's performed as well, which I very much want to do. So I hope we can find time and money within the project to expand in that direction as well. But yeah, certainly we'd like to look further.
Well, I guess so we can finish. Thank you again for your presentation.